Most people think it's enough to just do something that's, RAG-based. Have an average RAG system, dump the top K documents into your prompt and, really just hope for the best. I call that context stuffing and not really grounding.
Data is treated as the dirty little secret of AI. When it makes headlines, it's usually for a bad reason. I'm Jennifer Ding from Encord. I'm a data scientist, data steward, and even a data festival organizer. I'm into data and I think we should talk about it more. That is what AI Data Chats is for. In today's AI Data Chat, we are here with Hirsh Pithadia, co-founder and CEO of Vlayu. Welcome, Hirsh. What is your AI data topic for today, and what are you pairing it with?
Thanks a lot for having me here. I'm really looking forward to this. And my AI hot take when it comes to data is that LLMs don't need more parameters. They actually need context that matters more. And I'm pairing it with just some coffee. I've got a bit of a controversial opinion. I'm a big fan of instant coffee, so I've paired it with Kenco Millicano instant coffee, the best out there. And yeah, I just love instant coffee, so yeah.
Love that you've taken this curated approach to your topic and your drink, and that you have a hot take for your drink as well. Both sound lovely. So whenever you're ready, take it away.
I think there is a big sort of obsession on model size. And I think a lot of times it's missing the point, because more often than ever, when you're building in the real world, your applications, your LLMs, they don't need more parameters. They actually need context that matters. What happens is that having bigger models, they're good at fluency. They're not good at factuality. And I think that's something that's overlooked. Often people think hallucinations are bugs, but they're more, you could almost think of them as a side effect of, ungroundedness. So the natural question is, how do you actually get the context that matters, which leads to, grounding your models? That is the sort of hot take I think we should be talking a lot more about.
So just like many other aspects of life, size is not all that matters. Really interesting to think about what design considerations you might take into account if you want to elicit different kinds of capabilities, not just fluency and the ability to rap in multiple languages, perhaps, but also the ability to provide correct and more trustworthy answers. So let's dig into this. When we think about context in different kinds of applications, what does good context mean? What does it look like?
That's a good question. And I almost categorize it with, or kind of open it up more with, what exactly is grounding as well. So when we sort of unpack it, grounding essentially means, providing your LLMs with linking the output of what you have to real world or verifiable sort of context. And the way I think of it is there's parts to it. The first part is some sort of interactional grounding, interactional context. So, you've got your chat window, the historic context of what you discussed, 10 or 15 prompts ago. And then there is the sort of more symbolic context, the symbolic grounding, the stock price of Tesla or something like that. Like, can I actually go and find somewhere in some sort of knowledge base the exact sort of query of what exactly was Tesla's stock price? Then you've got more things like contextual grounding, which is can I grab a paragraph from a textbook to kind of augment my context with whatever I'm trying to augment, essentially.
Thanks for breaking that down. So for these different aspects of context, I can imagine some are easier to capture, such as what was in the conversation beforehand, but others might be a little more challenging, such as what are verifiable sources of information that should be used for grounding. So how do you think we should approach that question?
I'll briefly talk about how most people building applications of this have been doing it and what not to do. I think most people think it's enough to just do something that's, RAG-based. Have an average RAG system, dump the top K documents into your prompt and, really just hope for the best. I call that context stuffing and not really grounding. Mind you might do something a bit more intelligent or, advanced. You might do some sort of re-ranking, or, you might do something like a query rewrite, but inevitably it's still just shoving context and just assuming that the vibes will vibe, if that makes sense. But I think technically speaking, you want more sort of alignment between the source data, the prompt, to get effective answers. What this often means is you need some form of schema or, a schema alignment to kind of do this. You need a verification or execution verification, especially with all the sort of tool callings that are happening these days. And then there is the more, you could say, qualitative side of things, so epistemic. I've got this content or this content from this source. Do I trust it? Is it a reputable source? How do I go find that source? Do I trust that source? Where did it come from? So there's all these sorts of elements that really constitute to some sort of grounding.
The hot takes just keep on coming. I love it. So RAG systems are not enough. We can't just let the vibes keep vibing. We don't want context stuffing or shoving. Yeah. That all makes a lot of sense. I wonder if there is an example that you've encountered in your work at Vlayu that would help bring this to life. Some of what you're saying reminds me of the biggest problems we faced, not just with AI, but also on different spaces of the internet, such as social networks, which is how can we know that the information we're receiving from a system is true, is verifiable, is trustworthy?
I've got quite a few. So what Vlayu does is it works in a lot of knowledge work domains. And essentially what we do is provide a grounded API to allow, anyone building applications to, ground their responses. It so happens that we work a lot in the knowledge work domain, and finance is a big part of it. Our users will come and ask, could you give me, Tesla's Q1 net income? If it's ungrounded, the model might go and look at its pre-trained window and grab some sort of SEC filings and hallucinate based on that data. Alternatively, it might do some form of, search, if it's got access to web search and, might go grab some sort of results. But what exactly it should be doing is providing a much detailed, grounded answer. What this means is pull the latest 10Q, from the SEC filings, extract the tables from there, grab a timestamp, provide a filing link as part of your response. So, that's what a well-grounded sort of response looks like. We have found that, especially in the knowledge work domains, most people want the latter because they can't trust the output and make some sort of decision based on that, or rather make a confident decision based on that, as opposed to, something that's, just been put out there by the model, or, just based off sort of web search. This actually becomes more critical in domains like legal. It's something we didn't realize until we started speaking to a bunch of lawyers, where they were like, no, we don't want our sort of models and systems to hallucinate, because the implications of hallucination, it implies legal malpractice, which is very, very significant.
Thank you for those examples. Maybe we can zoom out a little bit. I think a theme that has been emergent in our conversation is that we do need to decenter models in our considerations of AI systems, because there's so many different components that work together to result in the kind of answer or output that we actually want from AI systems. So I'm curious how you think about the infrastructure around what is needed for what you're describing. At Encore, we think a lot about the infrastructure for giving humans the tools to add context to data that exists. It sounds like a lot of what you're thinking about is the infrastructure that can make this valuable context available for AI systems. What components of data infrastructure are needed or sometimes missed?
It's a great question, and I think we are definitely in alignment. When we think of data and all this being a function of infrastructure. So I'll give you almost like an engineer's answer to this. A lot of our end users are startups and founders building in the AI application layer space, and oftentimes we see them doing the same thing. They will kind of build some sort of index, grab the documents, chunk them, do some query, and then you iterate and improve. They will be using the same sort of data sources to do the same stuff. And, like when you look at, 10, 15 startups doing the same thing, it's like, hold on a minute, why is everyone just replicating all this stuff? It's just infrastructure. You guys don't need to do this. And we've not even talked about the cost behind all this, because it's just replicated costs. A simple thing like building a performant RAG or a vector index at scale. You can do it, but it's also going to be very, very, very pricey. So we think of it as infrastructure. Let people really do this, really optimize it. Think of it as an engineering problem in part. And you can just use this like some sort of dev tool. So that's our sort of way of thinking about it.
Totally makes sense. I can see there being a good technical reason for this, a good business case, and maybe even environmental reasons as well. So also like Encord, Value operates in both London and the Bay Area. I'm wondering, based on your observations, how do the approaches to data practices or data in general differ in these AI ecosystems?
Oh, it's a very so I think it's in part that question's predicated by the sort of cultures in both sides of things. And personally, I feel like the sort of London and Europe ecosystems more systematic, scientific method oriented, in the data practices. Whereas in the Bay Area and SF, it's more the whole move fast, break things sort of approach. Let's just kind of get something rolling and let's just iterate quickly and see where it goes. So that's been a big sort of, I don't want to say culture shock, but it's something that is very noticeable in both ecosystems, especially in how they think and work with data. The other thing that I've noticed over here, maybe it's a cultural thing, but when you kind of talk about their data stacks over here, a lot of people tend to over-engineer their data stacks as opposed to Bay Area, where I think they've just accepted that this is just a V0 or V0.1, so there's no over-engineering as part of their data engineering philosophy.
And how do you at Value balance both? So between over-engineering and systematic versus, just iterate, go. I can imagine for something like data infrastructure that Value is building, having a good balance of both will be important.
So it's a good question, because Value as a company has decided that it wants to build data infrastructure. We don't work in a few terabytes. We work in a few tens of terabytes, scale size. So like we can't just vibe things out. Like we have to really kind of think about things, because things have to work at that scale. But more importantly, you have to also start thinking about the costs as well, and how you're going to store things. So we have to be a bit more sort of pragmatic in how we kind of build and architect stuff. So for us, it's more of an informed approach more than the sort of vibe it out kind of approach. But I like to think that we're doing this so that other people can vibe it out on top of us.
It's a great way to frame it. So you provide the reliability as a foundation. This is system level thinking so that, the vibers can vibe. Well, final question from my end. You recently wrote an interesting blog post about how the internet was never about selling data. It was about monetizing access, and about how different layers of the internet are really built on top of this principle. So when we think about search engines, social networks, models now, there are really ways to gate or control access to data. So I'm curious if you could share a little bit more about what inspired that piece and what you think people misunderstand about where the value in data lies.
It's a very deep question. What kind of got us kind of thinking about it? I think it was around 2022. At that time it was Common Crawl. It's the C4 dataset was the sort of go-to, for training. It kind of got us thinking that the web as a source for data is going to kind of just keep on growing. What does that mean? When it comes to firstly building on top of it, but more importantly, once you've kind of built your sort of models, you want to deploy agentic systems. When we started thinking about agentic systems, what really hit us was, hold on a minute, if agents are going to become a bigger sort of population or a bigger class of users of the web, what exactly does monetization look like? And the reason why this is very significant is because if you see the internet's monetization model at the moment, it's based on, you could say, a tacit covenant, between publishers or people that actually create content, which is, hey, you know what? You guys give us these sort of impressions or the clicks, and we're going to monetize those and run our servers and all the sort of content off that sort of monetization model rather than a direct monetization model. Now, if you kind of pair that with the understanding that let's say in the next 5-10 years, every human might have at their disposal about 5 to 10 sort of AI agents. If the internet's population is about 1.5 to 2 billion, we're talking about 15-ish billion sort of agents. Now, 15 billion agents browsing the web, but not triggering any sort of impressions, or they're not triggering any sort of, pay-per-clicks. What does that leave us with? Can we have a much more sustainable model for agents and these agentic systems to be a first-class user of the web? And it does not necessarily mean that AI developers have to pay. Like, we have to think of a better way or better mechanisms to allow people to actually use and, earn money from content as well. Not just, the content owners, but, AI developers themselves as well.
Really interesting vision that you paint of the future of the internet. I think it is also just interesting to think about this scenario, this very much real thing that's happening, which is that we do have different kinds of users on the internet, even though at the moment there's not that many different kinds of gates or distinctions for how we treat them. There's of course robots.txt as a way to control the behavior of bots. But as you pointed out, now there's different kinds of automated systems, agents of different forms, personal agents, company agents, all kinds of agents that might be starting to take actions on the internet. So I'm curious, based on your work with Common Crawl, what the initial thinking is around how to distinguish between different kinds of agents or human users potentially also on the internet, and what different kinds of access might look like.
I think the robots.txt as a standard was designed for the old web, not like an agentic web. There is a lot of work that is being done actually at the World Wide Web standards level. So the Internet Architecture Board is actually thinking of creating a revision or a new revised standard on what, a robots.txt or an exclusion protocol for AI systems looks like. What does this look like for us? It's still too early to really say, but when you kind of think about how these systems are being used, especially agents, I think at the moment we're only, you could say, in a read-only mode of the web. So agents are only kind of reading from the web. There's some work in calling APIs and other systems, but there's no full-blown write and execution part. So at the moment, when you think of it as just read-only, when it comes to the read-only standards, there's things like llm.txt that has started to come along. Quite a few webmasters are kind of integrating it at the root of their sort of domains, but it's still very early. I guess what I'm trying to say is the way we think of it is in the read, write, execute sort of realm. So at the moment, when read, write and execute is coming along, as these systems get a bit more mature, I think we'll have a better understanding of them.
Wonderful. I think with that, we're ready to go into our rapid fire round of questions to close out this chat. What scale of data are you working with these days?
So we work at the tens and hundreds of terabytes. We're in the process of doing PubMed, or rather a subset of PubMed. I was speaking to my co-founder Harvey, and he told me the entirety of PubMed is about 54 petabytes. I was like, bloody hell, okay. But at some point, we want to be able to index at that scale. Going back to the current scale that we are working on, it's hundreds of terabytes and building full text RAG indices over this it's got its own sort of challenges just by themselves. But I'm a distributed systems guy. I love these kinds of problems.
Any favorite data sets you've come across recently?
I am a bit of a language nerd. I was born and brought up in Kenya, so I've got a bit of an affinity for sub-Saharan sort of languages. The one that I've been looking into is one called Ken Corpus, which is a data set of speech and text over Kiswahili and a few of the regional dialects. So there's Luya and Luo. Other than that, I also dabble a lot with like Indic languages. Spent about 5 or 6 years learning Sanskrit. There is a great data set on Hugging Face. Sanskrit is a bit of a weird language in the sense that you've got the written Sanskrit, which is quite different from sort of spoken sort of Sanskrit, and what comes to them is these grammar rules called Sandhi. And this data set essentially is this is what it looks like with Sandhi, and this is what it looks like normally. So these are the two data sets that I've been working quite a lot with in my personal sort of work.
What do you think is an AI data challenge that should be receiving more attention?
It's something we actually discussed. It's just this whole idea about agents becoming a big user of the web. So, what exactly is the monetization model of agents? So, how do we make it very sustainable?
Do you think 2025 is the year for AI data?
It might be a bit of a broken record answer. I think most people have said agents. So I'll kind of take a bit of a different answer and say it's about tool calling, not agents, but we know it's the same thing. The reason why I actually say this is it just hit me about 2 weeks ago that I'd gone to a Luma event, and every other person was just building in some sort of tool calling or agentic space, and that's when it hit me. Okay, yeah, like we are actually in this.
A final question to close out today's chat: how is your pairing of your drink of the fancy instant coffee with today's data topic?
Great. I mean, for me, I think you can never go wrong with instant coffee. It's quick, easy, and most importantly, it's probably the best caffeine you can get. That's very accessible.
Well, thanks for joining us, Hirsh. Where can we find more of your work?
So you can check us out on X. So it's Value Network, VALYU Network. My X is ZK108, and you can just go to www.value.network and you'll find us there as well.
That wraps up this AI Data Chat. You can find links to our speaker's work in the episode description. If you'd like to share your thoughts or suggest a speaker, email us at aidatachats@encore.com.